The resulting crisis could be as bad or as worse as the one in 2008-2009. As in 1980 and 2008, while our calculations clearly pointed to a debt crisis ahead, I knew that I could be wrong, because it would be a big deal if I was right. I wanted to discuss what I was seeing with top policymakers, both to alert them and to have them correct me if they saw things differently. Good morning, everybody. Hope you're all doing really well. I am looking forward to another really amazing day, and I hope you are too. So to get the day started, and I know the reason you're here is because you love starting with a bit of reading, which is a great way to start feeling motivated and a really great way to learn something and have something to implement throughout your day. We're going to be reading Principles by Ray Dalio. And we are in a section called Where I'm Coming From, which is part 1. And we are on the section Anticipating the European Debt Crisis. Now, Ray's been able to anticipate quite a few things after his first mistaken thought that he saw a depression coming, which never came. So I'm very curious to see how he anticipates and what he learns about this European debt crisis. So here we go. Let's get into it. Let's do some reading. Beginning in 2010, my Bridgewater colleagues and I began to see the emergence of a debt crisis in Europe. We had looked at how much debt had to be sold and then how much could be bought for a number of countries, and determined that many Southern European nations were likely to come up short. The resulting crisis could be as bad or as worse as the one in 2008-2009. As in 1980 and 2008, while our calculations clearly pointed to a debt crisis ahead, I knew that I could be wrong, because it would be a big deal if I was right. I wanted to discuss what I was seeing with top policymakers, both to alert them and to have them correct me if they saw things differently. I encountered the same sort of resistance without good explanations that I had encountered in Washington in 2008. Only this time in Europe, things were stable at the time, and though I knew there was no reason to believe they would stay that way, most of the people I spoke to weren't ready to listen to my reasoning. I remember a meeting I had with the head of the International Monetary Fund when we were still in the calm before the storm. He doubted my seemingly crazy conclusions, and he wasn't interested in going through the numbers. Just as US policymakers had before 2008, the Europeans did not fear what they hadn't experienced before. Because things were good at the time and the picture I was painting was worse than anything they'd experienced in their lifetimes, they found what I was saying implausible. They also didn't possess a granular understanding of who the borrowers and lenders were, and how their abilities to borrow and lend would change with changing market conditions. Their understandings of how markets and economies worked were oversimplified, like those of academics. For example, they looked at investors as a single thing they called the market, rather than an amalgam of different players who bought and sold for different reasons. When the markets did badly, they wanted to do things that increased the confidence, figured that if they built confidence, the money would come and the problems would disappear. They didn't see that whether they were confident or not, specific buyers didn't have enough money and credit to buy all the debt that had to be sold. Just as all human bodies work in essentially the same way, so do the economic machines in different countries. And just as physical diseases infect people without regard to nationality, so do economic diseases. So while the policymakers were at first skeptical, I approached my conversations with them by looking at the physiology of the case at hand. I would diagnose the economic disease they were suffering from and show them how its symptoms progressed by referencing prior analogous cases. Then I'd explain the best practices for treating the disease at its different stages. We would have high quality back and forths about the linkages and the evidence. Now, the interesting thing to learn and to take on board with this part is that Ray Dalio is aware of how things function and how it fits together. He spent a lot of time studying, thinking about it and understanding everything. And because of this, when he has a conversation with somebody else, he can tell whether they are just disagreeing with him without having any evidence to back it up, or whether they are just disagreeing with him because they just want to disagree with him and can't really argue the case for why. If you are able to do this, you're going to be very, very good, because it allows you to be able to see when you are correct, because you have arguments for what you are talking about and the other person does not, as opposed to when you have arguments and they have arguments. And so it's not just cut and dried, and it's not just exactly the way you see it. So this is something that you want to be able to do. You want to make sure that you are as prepared as possible, that you have understood and read and gotten into the details of how everything fits together and how everything works. And to do this, you want to go out and learn as much as possible. Yesterday, I was very curious about why the stock market has this tendency to go to zeros. And it's something that I've never understood. I've always known, but never really understood. So I went and dove a little bit deeper into it yesterday. And I discovered that when people are buying or selling, if the price of a stock is, say, for example, $10 or $10.45, most people do not really care about the extra 45 cents. But when it comes to setting stop losses or setting automated things, then people are most likely to want to finish something off at a round number. So imagine watching your stock go from $9.10 to $9.20, $9.30, $9.40. The place where most people will want to stop their loss is going to be on the exact $10 mark. And why? Well, it's just psychology. It just sounds like it's a round number, so it's beautiful, so it must be nice. And I would rather have $10 in my pocket than $9.40 in my pocket. And this comes back to the old thinking of, that means that I would have coins in my pocket. And of course, if you sell your shares for $9.40, it's just going to be on the bank account. You won't have any coins. But in our minds, we would prefer to have a crisp $10 note than we would like to have a $5 note and lots of coins. And so this is why the stock market will often hang on 00 numbers. And the reason for it is because a lot of automated triggers are happening at that time. And so it will then lead to people buying and people selling at that price point, whereas everything is manual above that and below that. And when you get to the next 00, if you now get to $20, again, the same stickiness starts to happen in the market. So the more you can understand, the more you understand the details, the more you can explain. And one thing that you can do is to start teaching things immediately, which is why I love reading and giving you my commentary. It gives me the ability to not just read something. It gives me the ability not just to learn something, but it gives me the ability to then share my ideas and thoughts and my commentary, which reinforces it even more for me. So in real life, not just here, but everywhere, as soon as I learn something new, I will go and look for somebody, anybody that I can quasi annoy and tell them about the things that I have been learning. And I have noticed that it has made my memory so much stronger. I can remember the details of many, many different things because I have gone out and taught it immediately after I have learned it. So that is something that you can also implement in your life. Yet, even when I did succeed in helping them see the linkages, the political decision-making system they had to work within were dysfunctional. Not only did they have to decide what they would do as individual countries, the 19 countries of the European Union had to agree with each other before they could act, in many cases unanimously. There was often no clear way of resolving disagreements, which was a big problem because what needed to be done, printing money, was objectionable to German economic conservatives. As a result, crises would intensify to breaking points while European leaders grappled in long closed-door meetings. Those power struggles tested the nerves of everybody involved. I can't possibly convey the amount of bad behavior these policymakers had to endure for the benefit of the people they represented. For example, in January 2012, a few weeks after he'd been appointed Minister of Economy and Competitiveness by Spain's new president, I met Luis de Guambo, Guando, a man I learned to admire for his forthrightness, intelligence, and heroic willingness to sacrifice himself for his country's well-being. The old government in Spain had been thrown out, and the new government took office as Spain's banks were about to collapse. The new Spanish policymakers were immediately forced to haggle with representatives from the IMF, the European Union, and the European Central Bank, the Troika, as it was called. They did this into the wee hours of the morning and were required to sign a loan agreement that essentially handed over control of their banking system to the Troika in exchange for the financial support they desperately needed. My meeting with Minister de Guando took place the morning after the first and most difficult of these negotiations. With bloodshot eyes, but with a very alert mind, he patiently and forthrightly answered all my difficult questions and shared his thoughts about what reforms Spain should undertake to deal with their problems. During the next couple of years, over considerable objections, he and his government pushed these controversial reforms through. He never got the praise he deserved, but he didn't care about because his satisfaction came from seeing the results he produced. To me, that is a hero. As time passed, the European debtor countries fell into deeper depression. This led Mario Draghi, the president of the European Central Bank, to make the bold decision to buy bonds in September 2012. This move averted the imminent debt crisis, saved the euro, and as it would turn out, make a lot of money for the ECB, the European Central Bank. But it failed to immediately stimulate credit and economic growth in the countries that were in depression. Inflation, which the ECB was mandated to get to about 2%, was below that target and falling. While the ECB had offered loans on attractive terms to banks in an attempt to solve this issue, banks weren't taking them up on the offer sufficiently to make a difference. I believe that things would continue to worsen until the ECB printed money and pushed it into the system by buying more bonds. The move towards quantitative easing appeared obvious and necessary to me, so I visited Draghi and the ECB's executive board to share my concerns. At the meeting, I told them why this approach would not be inflationary, because the level of spending, which is money plus credit, and not just the amount of money that drives spending and inflation. I focused on how the economic machine works, because I felt that if we could agree on that, most importantly, how buying bonds moves money through the system, we could agree on its impacts on inflation and economic growth. In that meeting, and in all such meetings, I shared our calculations as well as the important cause-effect relationships as I saw them, so that together we could assess whether the conclusions made sense. A major impediment to this action was that there is no single bond market for the entire Eurozone, and the ECB, like most central banks, isn't supposed to favor one area or country over another. Given those conditions, I shared my theory for how the ECB could do quantitative easing without breaking its rules by buying bonds proportionately across every member country, even though Germany didn't need or want the easing that such purchases would bring them. The German economy was doing relatively well, and inflation fears were beginning to emerge there. In the course of those 18 months, I met with several top European economic policymakers, perhaps most importantly German Finance Minister Wolfgang Schäuble, who I judged to be exceptionally thoughtful and selfless. I also saw how politics within Germany and Europe worked. When push came to shove, the ECB would have to do what was best for Europe, which was to print the money and buy the bonds in the way I had suggested. Doing that was consistent with the ECB's mandate, and the Southern European debtor countries had the votes to allow it to do that. So I figured that it would be the Germans who would get overruled and face the decision to leave the Eurozone, which they would ultimately not do because their leaders had a strong commitment to the Eurozone, with Germany as part of it. Europe is extremely interesting in that sense because it's all these countries just smashed together, and the decision of a central bank is one that is going to be for the whole area, with the countries inside the EU doing their best to keep very similar economic conditions, but when they are not similar economic conditions, that's when it becomes almost impossible for them to decide what to do, even though it's similar in some countries. So for example, if you have a look at what the central bank in Australia, the Reserve Bank, does, if you have a look at most of Australia. Sydney, very, very much an outlier in regards to what is happening here. And so if you look at the decisions that they make, if you are living in Sydney as I do, you look and you often say, why on earth would they be doing that? Because Sydney is doing fine. There is no need to raise interest rates, do this, drop interest rates, etc., etc. So very, very interesting how the European Union works, because it is even more complicated than a country where all of the decision making and everything is based on that single country. Here we're talking about different countries with different cultures, different ideals, different ideas, and they all have to seem to somehow come to an agreement. Whereas in Australia, for example, most of the states would relatively easily come to an agreement. In Europe, they would not. Draghi finally announced the move in January 2015. It had a great effect and created a precedent that would allow more quantitative easings in the future if they were needed. The market reaction was very positive. On the day of Draghi's announcement, European equities were up 1.5%. Government bond yields fell across the major European economies, and the euro fell 2% against the dollar, which helped stimulate the economy. These moves continued over the following months, stimulating European economies, supporting pickup in growth and reversing the decline in inflation. The ECB's decision was obviously the right thing to do for reasons that were relatively simple. But seeing how controversial its move was, it occurred to me that the world needed a simple explanation of how the economic machine works. Because if everyone understood the basics, then economic policymakers would be able to do the right things a lot faster and with less angst in the future. That led me to make a 30-minute video, How the Economic Machine Works, which I released in 2013. Besides explaining how the economy works, it provides a template that helps people assess their economies and gives them guidance about what to do and what to expect during a crisis. It had a much bigger impact than I expected, as it was watched by more than 5 million people in 8 languages. A number of policymakers told me in private they found it helpful for their own understanding, for dealing with their constituents, and for finding better paths forward. That was very rewarding to me. We are going to leave it there, but I am very curious to now go and see if I can find that video. And I am going to go and watch that because it seems like a very interesting video to watch. Okay, I hope you are all ready for an absolutely amazing day today. I hope you learned something and understood a little bit about what was going on. And if you didn't, that you go and you study and learn a little bit more about what was discussed, about quantitative easing, about printing more money in order to be able to stimulate an economy, especially when there is a crisis coming and the people are not going to be able to pay their debts. And what you want to be able to do is give them some money in order to be able to pay those debts, but not do it so that the inflation rate increases, which the European zone is very, very touchy on that. And they definitely do not like inflation going over 2%, which I think that they will be struggling with at the moment. That's another story for another day. Okay, so if you have any questions around that, or if you'd like to watch more videos on the principles or on Rich Dad Poor Dad, or if you'd like to read together with me The Art of Thinking Clearly, you can do that on YouTube. You can find us at the Passive Cashflow Club, and we would love to see you there. Make sure you hit subscribe because we are also putting up other videos that we are answering your questions, for example. So if you are subscribed, you will know when your video or when something comes up that answers a question, and who knows, it might be one of your questions. So make sure you do that. If you do have questions, if you are unsure about something that I just read about, or if you have a question about something and you'd like me to go into a little bit more detail, then feel free to ask that question and send it to me at business_team_6_official on Instagram. And I would love to hear from you. I would love to answer your question, and then we'll put it up on YouTube as well. Because anytime that I read something that you're not sure of, or if I give an explanation that does not make sense to you, I would love to put together a video to help you out with that. Also, if you would like to be able to practice and get better at your investing, or if you would like to get started with investing, then reach out and let me know that you'd be interested in the Cashflow Club, and we can send you an invite so you can come and play and you can practice everything that you are reading about together with me. And you can do it in a way that it's safe, and you can learn about stocks and real estate and business and all of these different things, and how to then implement it into real life so that you can achieve your goals and dreams, which is what this whole thing is all about. It's not just about me reading the book. It's about you eventually being able to take action and understanding how everything fits together, and you being able to achieve your goals and achieve your dreams and be able to figure out how to live the lifestyle that you've always wanted. Otherwise, there wouldn't be much point, would there? So reach out and let me know if that's something that you'd be interested in. We would love to be able to meet you and play a game with you that simulates life and that gives you the tools and the skills to be able to invest more wisely. So I would love to be able to meet many of you. I know that I can see some of your messages and your hearts and all of those different things, and I really appreciate that. But meeting you in real life would be really amazing, or online for a game of Cashflow as well. So I'm going to leave you to go out and work on some of the things that you need to work on today in order to be able to start getting those goals and start getting those things in action for you to be able to reach your goals of being able to live a different kind of lifestyle and to be able to create perhaps passive income or other wealth creation things that you want to set in motion. And then I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow for another reading at 8 a.m. Sydney time. But in the meantime, I want you to remember that you need to make the switch to unlock your rich, because if you keep doing things the way you are right now, if you do not make any changes, nothing will happen. But if you make that switch, you can unlock the rich by doing things in a different way, which always get a different result. If you do one thing all the time for the whole life, then it's going to be the same result that you get. But if you do different things, it might not immediately be the thing that gets you to your desired outcome. But eventually, if you keep doing things different and you keep at least looking in the right direction, if I just randomly do things, obviously it will take a very long time for me to find the thing that's going to get me to my goal. But if I take the time to actually start looking in the correct direction of where I need to go, then I might find the key that is going to get me to those riches. So I'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining. And I'll quickly go back onto Bigo in order to be able to say hello to everybody and thank everybody for their little hearts and everything. And then I'll see you all tomorrow. Thanks again for joining. Really appreciate it.